Hi everyone, thanks for joining. In this week's episode, we are chatting to commercial travel photographer and all-round nice guy, Mr. Tom Parker. We're going to cover his approach to assignments, talking about logistics, preparation and production, and including the joys of air travel and airport baggage. We'll also touch on what the future holds for travelling photographers.
Okay, so this week we are joined by the photographer, Mr. Tom Parker, who is a travel photographer who works globally for a number of different clients. Started off his career working in the city, moved from that to journalism in Nepal, spent a few years floating around India, retrained as a broadcast journalist, and finally settled on being a photographer. So, Mr. Parker, can you tell us a bit? Good morning. Tell us a bit about how you kind of tell us a bit about your journey and how you got into photography, how you ended up where you've ended up.
Yeah, well, I mean, you said I worked in the city. I mean, that's a very sort of very loosely worked in the city. I mean, as I think a lot of people post-university, certainly back at the end of the 1990s, the sort of range of things you could do never seemed to be very large. I mean, I barely sort of knew that photography was a profession back then. So I wanted to basically make as much money as I could in a very short amount of time, and then bugger off and travel and see the world. So I ended up getting 3 jobs in the city, which quickly made me realize that it wasn't for me, to put it politely. And then I knew I wanted to go abroad, and I'd always fancied Nepal. No, sorry, let me start the story again. So I wanted to go I wanted to travel abroad, and I thought I wanted to be a journalist. So I emailed, I think it was like 6 or 7 different newspapers around the world. I think there was one in Vietnam, one in Costa Rica. I quickly realized I couldn't speak Spanish, so that was a bit of a non-starter. And then the 2 guys got back to me, actually. One was in Vietnam and one was in Nepal. It was a little paper called the People's Review Weekly, which was a sort of very far left-wing, anti-America, communist-style paper. And they invited me over, very, very loosely. And so I just bought a flight. I left the city, bought a flight, and moved to Nepal, and started writing very badly for this little newspaper about mainly sort of Chomsky-esque, anti-American style, slightly conspiratorial articles. Well, I suppose they were opinion pieces based on very little experience. And in fact, the American embassy tried to get the newspaper closed down, I think, on 3 occasions because of my some of my rants. Anyway, so I bought a camera before I went. It was a very basic Nikon SLR film camera, and started taking pictures. And as I'm sure both of you experience yourself, it kind of started to get addictive. And I went to a little camera shop in Kathmandu that sold film and actually had loads of different lenses. So I got quite a lot of different kit for my little Nikon and wandered around Nepal, walked up in the mountains, and I guess I've sort of found myself as a very young man. God, this is going to be a long story. I'll condense it a little bit.
It's a very good intro.
It's a good intro. It probably gets a bit weaker post that. And then, sort of over the next few years, I ended up traveling in India a lot, and then I came back and I did a master's in broadcast journalism at City University because I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. Great course, great vocational course. Highly recommend any kind of course like that. I didn't do a photography course, never studied it, which maybe shows in my work.
Hardly.
But so then I had this interesting choice. I got offered a a job with a very good documentary company called Brook Lapping, which made some of the very best documentaries at the time. I think it probably still does, actually. And I had this one offer, and it was to work on this film called, I think it was Who is Osama bin Laden? This was back in 2002, 2002, post 9/11. And I got offered this job as a researcher, and it was basically interviewing everyone who'd met Osama bin Laden, because the big thing at the time was, who the hell is this guy? And then I'd also done this internship at Radio 4 on a program called You and Yours. And, I'd no intention of going into radio. And bizarrely, there was a producer there I got on very well with called Lawrence Grizel, who's still there, is a fantastic guy, who kind of became my mentor. And they offered me the chance to go and do freelance reporting at You and Yours. So I had this really difficult decision, do I go into radio or do I go and do documentaries, which was the thing I kind of always wanted to do. So I did. I worked at the BBC in London for, I think, a year and a half, which was, fantastic training, great group of people that worked there, interesting, intelligent people. Ended up traveling around the country a lot, doing some very random bits of journalism, making these little radio packages. But I also at the time I was continuing to take pictures, and my partner at the time, she was a journalist as well at a local paper, and she was like, "You've got to start trying to make some money out of this photography. I think you're all right at it." And I was like, "Listen, I take pictures of like bicycle chains and things. Nobody's going to annoy me." And I remember getting all these prints from these films I'd taken of things like, like close-ups of flowers and, stuff that you take when you first discover photography. You get a macro lens and you think, you start seeing the world in a new way and everything's fascinating. Anyway, the guy said, yeah, all right, come on, but you need to have a digital camera. And I was like, shit, okay. So my folks lent me the money to buy a digital camera, and it was the D100, which was kind of like the pro consumer one at the time. It was one of the very first digital cameras, great little camera. And I started doing all these local photography jobs. I think I did 1.5 days a week at the paper, and then 3.5 days a week at the BBC. Mm-hmm. I was shooting very random stuff, like kids' birthday parties, not kids' birthday, like sort of, birthday parties.
I'm going to introduce you in that in future, kids' birthday party photographer.
That's what I hope to do. Now I've got a kid, that might be, there's definitely a market for it. Which is, Tom's, probably something you've also thought about.
I have, diversify my income
or anything. So anyway, so I was doing all these random things. As a lot of people used to say that, training on a local paper is one of the best ways to kind of learn your craft, because you're basically taking pictures of fundamentally not very interesting stuff, but you're trying to find interesting ways of capturing it. And I probably wasn't at the time. But it is a good way of getting your mind, kind of training your mind to try and think about things in a slightly different way. So again, fast forward. Sorry, I'm bumbling a lot here. So fast forward, I then moved to Sri Lanka in 2004, and I was going to freelance for the BBC in South Asia. And then that was September 2004, and then December the 26th, Boxing Day 2004, the Asian tsunami came. Mm-hmm. And I was partying in Thailand on the islands at the time, on the other side where the tsunami didn't come. And as you guys probably remember, that nobody knew what had gone on. It was kind of getting all these reports of, there's been some wave happen, but it was all a bit vague. But my mates who I was living with were still living in Sri Lanka at the time. And as kind of time went by, I realised what had happened. And I think on the 28th, I jumped on a plane back to Sri Lanka. And I obviously saw what was happening, and I was getting calls from various newspapers. I worked with the independent correspondent who was covering it, who'd flown over, a guy called Stephen Kahn. and we traveled around the country, and I was getting passed on to other journalists from other newspapers, and I started shooting people like Newsweek and Washington Post and The Guardian, and then some, the glossier magazines. So it kind of, Tsunami in a weird way was sort of the start of my good exposure in my photography career. And yeah, it kind of snowballed since, from there. And I've, lived in India and spent a lot of the last 16 years, I guess, on the road.
But your permanent base is London?
My permanent base now is London. Yeah, so I moved back. I lived in Mumbai for 3 years, and then we came back. I lived there with my now wife. We came back in 2011, and it's kind of it was a tricky decision. I mean, it was a difficult place to live, and I'd kind of had enough of living the slightly crazy existence you do over there. And then we moved back to London, and it's, if anyone who's lived abroad for any substantial amount of time, you realize that moving back home is the most difficult move you can do. It's, you get the massive culture shock there, because there's something quite easy about living abroad. Your life's a lot easier. You can jump on a plane whenever you want. Everything's quite exotic and fun. You come back to London, you're sort of facing, your old self and all the other things that are attached with living at home. So I'm based in London now, but it's actually very good, because I've probably since then spent anywhere between 4 and 7 months abroad, shooting on different assignments. But I never tend to go away for more than, it used to be sometimes up to a month, but now it's generally no more than 2 weeks. Maybe 2.5 weeks. It all depends, what the assignment kind of breakup is, and whether I've got 2 assignments in a row, or whether I want to stick a bit of personal work on the back of an assignment, which I try and do now a lot more. And it's, it's always nice to come home. But sometimes I'm back, and then I'm back for 2 days, or I'm back for a day, and it's all a bit weird, because your life kind of is out of sync. And, as you guys both know, it can take a week to get back into that old rhythm with your partner and all that stuff. And when you get back and you've got other stuff to sort out, and you're acting like a madman, which, one tends to do anyway. It can be tough, but I try and go away for shorter. I'll go away for one assignment and then come back, rather than try to stick loads in a row. And now that I've got a child as well, I think that may have to change a little as well.
Yeah, I've got the same thing. I think for me, always traveling out for shoots and stuff, the hardest part was always coming back. Obviously, it's great to come back. You're really happy about being back, and you get to see family, etc. But for me, I'd get loads of requests I couldn't really maybe action until I got back into the office. So then I'd get back, and I'd be like, it's wonderful to see you, but I've got to do this. And they'd be like, you've been away for 3 weeks. Why are you doing that now? So I've had to change a few things around, obviously. So I'm now way more mobile, I think, so I can action, I think, every request from anywhere in the world. But it's
exactly. I mean, ideally, I think you guys are probably both a lot more organized than I am in terms of that kind of stuff. But it's always that thing, isn't it? You're in bloody, middle of nowhere, St. Helena, and somebody says, have you got those high res for that shoot you did for us last year?
Yeah.
And you're like, no. And you're always trying to manage clients, or trying to get, as Greg knows, because I share a studio with Greg, I'll get somebody in the studio, like they'll get a panic call from, top of a mountain in Papua New Guinea saying like, can you go into the Drobo? And I don't know what the file is. I'm not quite sure what the file number is, but I'm pretty sure it might be in that folder. You might like spending like 40 minutes of your day looking for a file for me. Or it's Hannah, my wife, who also does the same, and it's known as Parker duty.
Parker duty.
It's like there's a phone call, and I'm suddenly being nice, to people. I think it's probably a tone of voice
How?
Yeah, so trying to get a bit more organised with that, and yeah, that's that thing. When you're travelling all the time, it can be difficult because your life's in disarray, and then getting back into normality can take a bit of time.
I'd be interested then to kind of get a sense of what your typical kind of travel assignment is, because obviously, as you said, we share a studio, and yeah, lucky boy. How long have we shared a studio for now?
You haven't got the studio sharing diary. I've got
No.
one. I do a little marketing every day, little love heart every day. It's like grateful. I do a little prayer.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, we met in an Irish bar in Kuala Lumpur, didn't we?
We did indeed. We did indeed. Yeah.
And you nearly made me miss my flight.
Yeah.
With very expensive pints of Guinness.
That's it. Yeah. Because I convinced you that that it was all right to get to the airport with 45 minutes beforehand or some nonsense like that, and I nearly missed my flight with the same reasoning.
So we've
beers with your mates and somewhere fun. The last thing you want to do is go to the bloody airport.
Yeah. I mean, you moved into the studio a few months, I think, after that, didn't you? And
it's 3 years ago, actually.
Wow. Okay, time flies. Well, how do you feel having a studio has helped your practice?
Do you want me to answer the assignment one first or that one?
Well, I mean, a bit of both. Yeah. Studio needn't be a long response. And how do you feel it's...
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the thing about having there's two elements to having a studio. One is if you're a studio photographer, which I am not. I'm a location photographer. So I don't use the studio, like yourself or like a lot of the other people that we share a studio with, a lot of the other very good photographers we share a studio with. But I think I think mentally it's very good to share a space with other people who are in the same business as you, aka photographers. And it's very useful, because as a photographer, it can be quite a lonely pursuit sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very good to kind of bounce ideas off, whether that's, creatively, logistically, or from a business perspective. I mean, I think in some respects, the business perspective is probably the thing that we talk about the most, just because, when you're in the studio, you are dealing with so much of the admin of photography, which a lot of people maybe who aren't photographers aren't aware of, particularly with kind of with digital. But now, how much you charge clients, licensing, just kind of how much do I think I can charge a client? What's a reasonable rate to charge a client? How long should the terms of the contract be?
Mm-hmm.
How long do I need to shoot this? So I think there's quite a lot of sharing information on clients and how to deal with them, and I think that's really useful, because I think that's kind of, in a way, to become a successful photographer from a business perspective, which I think is a large part of being a photographer, is negotiating the business side of it, is understanding how to deal with clients effectively.
Mm-hmm.
How much you can push a client, what's reasonable. Because some people will ask you unreasonable things, and there's ways to negotiate to appear reasonable. And everyone's always pushing and jiggling and, negotiating and bartering. And I think, learning the mechanics of, if a client emails you and wants something from you, but it's, the figure's way different from what you had in your head, how to try and get to a position, to try and get to a point where you're both happy. And I think that's the key to the business side, really, is be able to negotiate that landscape of the industry. And I have an agent which does that on my commercial side,
mm-hmm.
Which is really useful to have. because they know the nuts and bolts of the industry, nuts and the bolts of dealing with, agencies and art buyers and whatever, much better than I do. And it can mean that as a photographer, I don't have to get in any of the sort of nitty gritty of, bartering with somebody about how much my day rate is, because I want to be the guy who, is the fun, creative person who, brings all the ideas and stuff. So it's very good to have that separation. But in a studio, I don't know what you think, Greg, but, from a creative perspective, I think, because I was talking this to another guy in the studio, Tom Layton, yesterday, about how I think as a photographer, that sharing of work is something that is probably not, we don't do enough of it in the studio. And I think there's a certain, myself, even though I've been doing it for a long time, there's a certain kind of self-doubt that you get as a photographer, particularly perhaps when you're doing something which is slightly outside of your box. And there's kind of that fragility and nervousness, which I still get, which is good, which is great, because it makes you realize that, there's always loads to learn. You still don't know what you're doing. But I think if there could be more sharing of, in our studio, certainly, I think that would be a useful thing. And I know it's something that we've talked about. And that's, it's bizarrely something like Instagram. You think that might be the way to do this. But for me, we'll talk about Instagram later, because there's a whole nother massive talking point. But I don't find Instagram as useful as chatting with other people about your work, who I know and trust in person.
Mm-hmm. And so when it comes down to, just for somebody who doesn't know what a typical day for you looks like, you tend to be, you shoot a lot for the big travel titles, and there's not many of those titles around, but pretty much everyone will have heard of the top 3 that you shoot for.
Yeah.
How does a typical day go? You get a phone call or an email, and they ask you if you're available and you can travel to some location. What do you go through in terms of preparation? Just talk us through the kind of typical travel assignment, what it involves, the kind of realities of the job.
You want it in London rather than on the ground, yeah. Okay, so one of the beautiful things about being a photographer, and I'm sure you get this. I'm sure you get this in all walks of life, actually. When you get an email and they say, it says the title is like Bolivia or Papua New Guinea, and you open it up and it's like, would you like to go to Bolivia for 10 days? And I still get that hit, that excitement of crumbs, what a great opportunity. I'm going to go to this place. So so it's just my personal, that's how the email makes me feel. But I obviously get quite a few offers, some which I will take and some which I will not take. I tend to, obviously places which I've been to before. I want to know more about the brief, more about the job. I'd be less inclined to take it. I want to go and do something which is new, where I haven't been. Generally a new country, but it can be a new city in a country. And for example, because I lived in India, I used to get assigned a lot of jobs in India, and I just got slightly bored of it. Really, it was no longer exotic to me. I knew how to shoot India. I mean, that's not in an arrogant way, but I knew how I shot India, so I kind of got a little bit stale. That has changed subsequently, but that's another story. But I will ask the client, I want to know more about the shoot, obviously where I'm going, how long I will have in a place, what kind of opportunities I will have to photograph in different places. Because I'm sure, both of you know that on certain jobs you get there and you're like, I haven't got any time to shoot here. You need physical time on the ground, particularly on something like a travel job, because you've got to find it yourself. It's not like a advertising job or a hotel shoot where the thing is there. You know,
But quite often you're also relying on good weather, good light, those kind of things that are out of your control, and so you need the time to have a
exactly.
weather day, and you've only got so many mornings and evenings with golden hour, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, you work out in your head, yeah, what are my shooting opportunities here?
Mhm.
And yeah, exactly that. You know, as any travel or location photographer or whatever, fashion photographer, anyone who's shooting outside is totally dependent on the outside light. And if you're going in the rainy season, which can have its benefits as well, you've got to make sure you've got at least a bit of time. You get some jobs and they say we need a cover, and sometimes it might be a cover with a model, and there's a team of people. You've got one morning to do it.
Mm.
And so then I will say, well, I'd explain, like, we need more time than that. We might it might be pissing down with rain. You want an outside cover. So it's trying to negotiate as much time as possible. And I think it's about being, when you're dealing with, professional, with the big magazines, and, a lot of the editorial, the good photo editors, the good art directors, they know what's involved in a shoot.
Mm.
They know there's so many different factors which you're playing with, which you just can't, they're totally out of your control. And in a way, that is kind of your skill as a location photographer or travel photographer, is to work all that out and maximize the good shooting hours and your good opportunities. And I think that really is the main skill of a travel photographer, is to work out what to do, when and where.
Mhm.
And I think that's the skill of a lot of street photographers, anyone who's not in controlled environments, is, and I think that's experience. A lot of people can take a good picture, but you've got to know how to get that picture. You've got to kind of produce in a way.
Yeah. Is there anything you use for example, when I am out there, just to make sure I'm kind of up to the minute, I use Dark Sky, the app on my phone. So it goes, you've got clear skies for 7 minutes, then it'll be pissing rain for 25 minutes, and then it'll be light rain, then it'll be clear again. So I know that I've got to get the shot in 7 minutes.
Yeah,
Is there
exactly.
anything?
Yeah, I mean, it's I've got I forgot what it's called. The Sun, is it Sunseeker?
Sunseeker, my favorite.
Which is also the name of a luxury. It's also the name of my boat.
Yeah, mine too.
I thought I'd recognise you from somewhere.
Sandra Bay.
Yachting buddies.
So do I use? I mean, what do I use? Yeah, so I use that. I mean, I look at. So all right. So how do I go about making sure I'm maximising my opportunities? Well, I mean, I will try and plan a day.
Mm-hmm.
If I know I've got to shoot I've got to shoot 8 different things in a day. So no, in fact, I'll break it up more. So I've got to shoot. I've got 7 days in somewhere, and I'm providing the client with 150 pictures, which are all supposed to be good, usable pictures. And I would expect from a 7-day shoot. I mean, it's totally variable. I'd probably get between 200 and 250 usable pictures, and there would be a limited amount of variations of the same thing in that.
Sure.
So there'll probably be 150 different photographs. And for the kind of publications, the luxury travel publications I work for, these kind of clients, they need a very good mixture of different pictures. I mean, this obviously varies from location, from job to job, but let's say I'm in the Bazaroto archipelago in Mozambique. Sorry, that sounds totally pretentious, but
just there, is it?
Let's say, for example, yeah. Sorry, I'm a complete wanker, but I use that because I'll tell you why I'm using that example. Basically, I was on a shoot there, and it was for departures a few years ago, and I was thinking about this because I was thinking about different shoots which have different elements to them, And you go somewhere like that, and people may think you go there and you're just taking pictures of amazing beaches and all that kind of stuff. But you can't get 150 pictures of a beach. It's simply impossible. So you've got to be really creative in terms of how you're gonna get those 150 pictures. And so you're stuck on this island. You're stuck in one resort, and you've got to get 150 pictures, decent, usable, high quality pictures, and you're stuck in an area that's like it's a tiny island, it's about 2 miles by 3 miles, and that is where the real kind of mental creative process comes into it. And for someone like that, you've got to shoot, usually with these sort of luxury publications, you've got to shoot the accommodation. So if you shoot accommodation, you got to shoot bedroom. You've got to shoot. Well, you got to shoot. You don't have to shoot anything, but you've got to shoot things which look good. And usually, you have to shoot a bedroom, which is a very difficult thing to shoot. Anyone who's tried to shoot a bedroom to make it look interesting is quite difficult. So you have to style it. You have to kind of throw some things over the bed, or get a book out, or throw a towel. Do the old drop of the sheet, where the sheet looks ruffled but in a stylish way. You've got to, then you've got to maybe shoot some food.
The old drop of a sheet, is that like a bit of Parker magic?
It's
just throw a sheet on the floor. Voila.
The best way to throw a sheet is actually just to literally throw it. And a lot of good stylists the way they do it is put your hand up, you just kind of drop it. Don't try and make it. Don't fiddle around with it. But there's a certain skill as well, which I don't have. Then you'll shoot the hotel, and then you think, right, I've got to shoot some portraits, but I don't really want to shoot portraits of staff, but I might have to. They're the only people around, so what am I going to do? So then you have to try and convince the staff to get out there. You have to pick the interesting looking staff. So you have to convince the staff to kind of dress up as. This is a very extreme example, so in Bazarutu, there was a guy who was a wicked horse rider. And he looked fantastic, fantastic physique, great face. So I got him out on his horse. He happened to have a horse, and we got him riding into the sea. So I shot him underwater, which was great fun. We had a helicopter. That's the only way of getting there. So we did a lot of aerial stuff. We had a boat, so I went out on a boat and shot some half in, shot some half out stuff. And you start it's weird when your choices are limited, you actually start to be more creative. When you've got this massive sort of choice of stuff, and funnily enough, Tom, we were talking about Calcutta before. It's quite a tricky city to shoot in a way because there's so much going on. You kind of think, God, there's going to be so many amazing pictures to shoot here. With your eyes, you see there's everything going on, these great characters.
It's very overwhelming.
And I'm sure you both had that, and there's an amazing market in Africa or something. And this is going to be fantastic. And you come out and you're like, I didn't get anything. It was rubbish. But, you're stuck in a sort of, I don't know, like a room in some burnt out building, and you're getting you're feeling really creatively inspired. So, coming back to my point, it's a very long-winded way back to my point. When I'm on the ground, I will try because I've shot a lot, because I've shot a lot of countries and a lot of different places, and you spend a lot of time shooting. So you get a lot of it. What works and what doesn't work up to a point. So the night before a shoot, I will have looked at the different options, locations we could shoot. The client will often have, they'll have things that need shooting, so I will make sure I go and shoot that. But I will try and shoot that in a different way to how it's been shot before. So I would have looked at, reference shots of other people from what they've, what they've done. and try and really think outside the box. And then I will do my own research, say in a city like Calcutta, of other places which look good. I will speak to my guide. I'll talk to my assistant. If there is one, that's very good to have a local assistant shooting abroad, because they know the city, they speak the language.
So and they know good places to get food.
They know best places to get food. They can act as your fixer, which which is massive. They sort of produce a fixer type person. So and then I'll ask staff at the hotel. I'll just ask everyone. I'll ask my driver. Drivers often know the cities better than anybody else. And they'll also know the sort of the weird parts of it as well. So, I mean, generally speaking, drivers are an invaluable source. And obviously, because you're spending a lot of time with your driver, you're speaking to them more than anyone often. My drivers often end up becoming my best mates, over that short period of time. You have those really intense relationships.
Yeah, because it's funny, isn't it? The time we spend with these guys is actually very intense. So I was shooting in Indonesia a couple of months ago, and I miss the guys I was with. They were really, really good fun. I was there for 2.5 weeks, and we basically lived in this van, driving to and from like rubbish dumps. It was very glamorous. But you're right. They become, they know everything about the place, and they become almost like your best mates. And I've come away, and I still have video calls with them every couple of weeks, and we've stayed in touch because they really kind of help make the project.
Yeah, I also find they're always very interested in what you're doing, because you kind of show them a different angle to look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I'll always bother them. I'm sure you guys do the same. I'm always demanding, like, can we do this? Can we do that? Is there a person that looks like this? Or it's just like this. And I think that's probably from my journalistic background. But you get that as a travel photographer. You have to be a journalist. You have to find out what the story is. You have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You have to be kind of relentless, but not annoying. And I think that's why I love travel photography as a whole, generally, because it just allows me just to kind of explore my curiosity. And unfortunately, I can't do that in London. I need these sort of exotic, full-on experiences to do it. And it keeps me sane.
It's interesting. I guess one thing I've always loved about your work, Tom, is the fact that you are able to go to places that I have seen photographed multiple times and shoot them in a way that that's very creative, and in a way which I look at the image and understanding the kind of the mechanics of photography, can look at it and kind of go, I still can't figure out how he shot that, or how he thought of shooting it like that. And obviously that's why you get hired to shoot for who you shoot for. But how do you find that, obviously your industry and to some degree my industry, because I shoot travel work as well, there's a lot of change happening in terms of kind of influencers that are traveling and kind of are in this gray area where they're not journalists, they're not necessarily, they're kind of, quite often they'll be working for kind of being sponsored in a way, or working in a different way to how we traditionally work. Do you think that the kind of the rise of, and I hate the term, but the rise of the influencer is changing the travel kind of industry in terms of photography? There's a lot of work that's produced that just looks the same. And I found that I've been in, I don't know, somewhere like Santorini, for example, and it's almost been ruined by the amount of people that are queuing to get the same picture because they've seen it on Instagram and they all want to get the same photo.
Got to get the likes. Got to get the likes.
Iceland's the same. Iceland is a country that's really, really pushed the whole kind of Instagram thing and invited a lot of young influencers over. And it's become this kind of go-to destination. But I know from having worked there that that's obviously had a negative effect as well.
Yeah,
in
well,
terms of
with the Iceland example, they're actually, and it's the same in Amsterdam and Santorini. The tourist boards are they're trying to discourage people from coming because it's been, a victim of its own success. Yeah, I mean, the Instagram thing is, I was thinking about this, just walking around the park thinking about this, trying to work out exactly how I feel about it. I think it's I think it's quite difficult to compare what we do and what the majority of Instagrammers do. I think they're two different things in a way. Um, I sort of I respect anyone who goes and works and does, shows the world to people. I've got no issue with that whatsoever. And I think they're kind of running in parallel in a way. I think with Instagram, I think the trend really is, as you say, is to kind of go to a beautiful place and take a beautiful picture of a beautiful thing with perhaps a small figure in it. And don't get me wrong, they do look great. We know how they're shot. They're all shot using particular software. A lot of them are done via drone, and I use a drone. But as you say, they're all quite homogenous in kind of their feel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think it is playing a certain part in this kind of digital addiction which we have, and I think the way people consume those pictures is slightly different, hopefully, to the way that we take photographs. It's probably not, because probably most people see my work on Instagram. So I can't really say my work is any better, but I think probably there's slightly more of a craft. I think there's probably a bit more work gone into thinking about the picture. I think it's not copying what other people have done.
Mm-hmm.
I think that becoming, shooting for the kind of now dwindling number of editorial travel magazines that exist. It's not, you need to be able to shoot lots of different things. You need to be able to shoot interiors, you need to be able to shoot food, you need to be able to shoot exteriors, you need to be able to shoot portraits, landscapes. There's a whole range of different skills needed. And a lot of the Instagram stuff that's got out there, the travel stuff, is very much big landscapes. And it is,
Mm-hmm.
it is fantastic. They do look beautiful, but I think it's probably a different craft to what we do. But I don't want to take anything away from these things. It's not for me, because the process of doing it, I think, is probably less engaging. I think for me, the whole joy of travel photography is going out and meeting people, and getting in difficult situations and asking people questions and finding out about their lives. And, I was talking about this earlier on with my partner, was, what is it that I love about photography? And is it the photographs? And, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I think when you come back from a shoot, or you've come back from a really good day shooting, you're really into the photographs and you're like, this is fantastic. And, I would say generally 3 to 4 weeks afterwards, I am into the photographs and I do like them. But then something else comes along, and you kind of, you don't forget those photographs, but you realize as time goes by, the things that really mattered in the process of traveling, the process of taking pictures, are the taking of the pictures rather than the photographs so much. And the people you meet, and those drivers, and those weird cups of tea you had with people, or that weird bar you ended up in, which, things got a bit spicy, or that flight you missed, or those weird encounters of things, which I think I really value. And I think that Instagram thing, in a way, kind of, there's none of that. It doesn't translate that. It's kind of like in a way, they remind me of those old posters that you still get in places like India, like a beautiful waterfall, or we've sort of reverted back to that sort of poster type mentality, which for me doesn't do that much. But I'm definitely not going to take it away from anyone who's doing it, and I imagine they're having a load of fun doing it. So hats off to them. If you can work out a way where you get to see the world and have fun and have beautiful, have beautiful times with nice people, then fine, yeah, great.
So with that in mind, is there any kind of thoughts that you've got in terms of where the industry that is kind of heading? Is there a market for? I mean, we've seen kind of the resurgence of magazines like Holiday Magazine that used to be big in the 50s and 60s and would commission people like Robert Capa and Henri Cartier-Bresson, and now commission is much smaller than it was back then. But it's almost like a bespoke kind of travel magazine. And obviously the magazines that you work for are generally incredibly creative in terms of what they use visually. But do you see kind of there obviously will be a desire for stuff that isn't the poster kind of shot like you're talking about with Instagram, like something more in depth, something with more character, something that goes a bit deeper. Where do you think that is going to be found moving forward if magazines, for example, continue to decline in the way that they have done over the last decade?
Well, I mean, I think the interesting thing about the magazine industry is that there's kind of been the decline of a lot of the big name titles. But as you say, there's a massive resurgence of a lot of these smaller, more niche titles, like Holiday or, like Serial or whatever, there's been a whole flurry of really high quality, great magazines, like a Vaughan, which you've shot for, and these are fantastically produced, don't need the adverts, perhaps have a slightly less rigid editorial guideline because they're not so dependent on the advertisers, probably have less budget, well, definitely have less budgets, but I think you probably have greater freedom to perhaps do what you want, and put forward your own voice in them. I mean, Holiday's kind of a travel-y, fashion-y magazine rather than I'd say a strictly travel type publication, but it's beautifully produced, and it has most photographers that shoot for it are fashion photographers, but I think there's a lot of very exciting niche magazines now, and if you go into in London, certainly a lot of these specialist news agents now, I mean, the variety of magazines you can buy is much bigger than it ever was. I think it's a bit of a myth. I think the mainstream, I don't think most people go into news agents anymore and buy magazines. People get subscriptions to magazines. That's the main way that people get magazines. So there's the less random buying of magazines. But, if you like a magazine, you subscribe to it. And I subscribe to quite a few magazines that get delivered through my door, and I think they're brilliant. And I still think for people who like the quality of visuals, for people who like who like having something tactile in their hand, there's still nothing like a magazine. And a lot of these new magazines are printed on very nicely printed, great grade paper, really thoughtfully done. The design is fantastic. So I'm excited about the magazine industry. I mean, I happen to still shoot for the more, I want to say mainstream, but the large circulation magazines, which are, fantastic. They are very, very beautifully put together, objects, and, the best people still working for them. So I think it's an exciting time in the industry. I mean, I hope the COVID thing. I mean, that's an interesting challenge for people who work in anything travel, or it's a challenge for our whole industry, really. And whatever you shoot, advertising or food, still life. I mean, that to me is the biggest challenge. Obviously, as a travel, editorially, I shoot mostly travel, so that's what's going to happen with that is going to be is an unknown at the moment. And I'm trying to stay optimistic, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time for things to get back into, the old ways. And in a way, now I sort of look at the dream life which I had, and hopefully it will continue as a traveling photographer. You both live very similarly. You kind of sometimes pinch yourself when you're on a assignment and think, is somebody actually paying me to do this?
I think also what this whole COVID breaks made me kind of think back. I kind of look back and go, oh, do you know what? I remember flying. At the time, it was a huge pain. I hated it. But actually now I'm kind of going, fond memories. I'm looking forward to flying again.
Well, I do also think there's a lot of places that actually will have really benefited from the respite of not having tourism at the moment. We've all been to parts of the world, around. It seems quite bad in certain places as areas of Thailand and the Philippines where they've had to stop tourists just because it's got so bad. Look at somewhere like Halong Bay in Vietnam. It's like a floating rubbish tip at the height of season. So you do wonder, hopefully, if this is potentially going to benefit certain areas, give them a little bit of time to get back to normal.
To resume, I mean, it's weird because obviously we all travel a lot, and I don't want my travel curtailed in a way, because that's kind of the way that I've been fortunate enough to live my life. But with this whole, as you guys have seen, and you go to these places, they are overrun by tourists. They are. There's no question they're ruined. Tourism has gone wrong, and I'm definitely part of the problem. Instagram's definitely part of the problem. So you do start kind of asking yourself these questions about how responsible it is to promote places. And I know from some trips I've had, there is this ethical dilemma. I've just come back from Antarctica in December, and I did, run it. I did have trouble justifying it to myself, but I knew another photographer would have done it. So in a way, that's kind of me not doing it was not a solution.
Sure.
There is an argument to be had as well that by people going to these places, as long as it's managed carefully by the place that they're visiting, I mean, that's their responsibility ultimately as a country in which it happens, is that hopefully people will learn something and they can connect in a greater way and they'll have an understanding. It's like the argument being, if somebody gets the opportunity to go on a safari and see animals in the wild, then they're more likely to care about the welfare of elephants, for example. The problem lies is in a lot of developing countries, the tourism can end up developing in a way that perhaps kind of outruns itself or isn't particularly carefully managed as it should be. So I guess I'd be keen to know, because we've probably got about 10 more minutes. So it'd be good to get from your years of traveling, what are your kind of takeaways? What kind of things do you feel like you've learnt? Do you have any tips for people when they're traveling? And that can be anything from kind of the kit you work with to negotiating airports or just traveling in general. Or are there any kind of takeaways that you've kind of picked up? Because I'm always interested to pick people's brains when they're as experienced as someone like yourself, to see, okay, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? What have you learned along the way on this journey?
And have you ever been held at gunpoint in an airport? So I've had it. I've been twice now.
Or generally speaking, what have I learned from traveling? I mean, I guess there's the photography side of it, and then there's the. From all this time, I'll talk about it from a photography perspective first. I think, one of the main things you learn from traveling so much and being abroad is that you realize that when you do shoot, there's only a certain amount of productive time you can actually have. And my main goal when I shoot now is to make myself prepared so that I am in the shooting zone as quickly as possible. And I'm sure you guys both had the same thing. When you're in that magic point where your eyes in, you know what to shoot, you're seeing the world differently, you can go and speak to anyone you like, you can go and charm people, you can use every single skill you need to go and get a good photograph when you're in an alien environment. So being prepared, is the best thing. Is the thing that I've learned now, is that I know how to prepare before a shoot. I know how to do research. I know when I hit the ground what I'm going to be doing. So I know mentally how to get in that space. And I think I was thinking about this. Even this ad job I just did in Spain. When I've got a big shoot, the morning of a big shoot, and I'm nervous about it. I still get nervous before big shoots, which I think is good actually, because it means you're taking yourself seriously. I always psych myself up. I always say, like, come on, you're going to do this. Like, this is going to be the best shoot. You know what you're doing. Like, this is going to be amazing. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. And then, if things are going wrong on the shoot, which inevitably they do, particularly when there's so many different elements, you're more relaxed about it. And, you're trying to think creatively about, how you get around these problems rather than try to get sort of your head, screwed up and about all these factors you can't ultimately control, which is kind of the good thing about sometimes working on your own, because you're totally in control. And I love that responsibility of only me deciding everything. And I know it's my fault if something goes wrong. Vis-a-vis, you got a team of 20 people, and you got hair, makeup, stylists, client, producer, whatever. You can't control all of that. You have to kind of let go, which is a kind of a totally different thing. And I love both of them. I love working in teams and working on my own for different reasons. From a practical perspective, I'll just one more minute on this thing. And the other thing I think that traveling so much teaches you is just, the joys of life, really. And I think that's why it's addictive. And I'm sure you both have the same thing, traveling, being able to travel the world, explore new things, understand people a bit better, understand yourself a bit better. I think it makes life a bit easier. And it's just, it's utterly joyful going to see the world, and just, you just understand a little bit more about it. And just those funny things that happen, funny people you meet, things that probably wouldn't happen to you if I just stayed in London. I'm not saying people don't find that joy living in London, but for me, I kind of need to go outside my familiar environment for that to happen. So yeah, I mean, it's a joyful thing, and I'm just grateful that I've managed to find a profession that allows me to do that, and it does satisfy my every need when I'm shooting in the zone in somewhere wicked and beautiful. It's life couldn't get any better in a way. So practical things about when I'm traveling. I was thinking about this because I know that you two are sort of you like your packing, and you're very much into it.
We do.
All this stuff. I mean, I'm probably slightly less into my my kit. I'm probably not into my kit enough. But often, because if I'm doing back-to-back jobs, actually my kit doesn't leave my bag, so it's sort of like it's all in there anyway. I guess I've tried to, over the years, I've tried to bring what I take with me down. I used to go away with like 7 lenses, like 4 primes and 3 zooms, and shift and various multipliers, and always 2 camera bodies, big camera bodies. Get back from a shoot, and you just like, didn't really use much of that. I used my 50, and I used my 135, and then my 24-70, and then you remember, like on the last day, you've got all these other lenses. You're like, shit, I better use that one. Like cursory pictures of it. So I think you get to know actually what you like shooting with, and then you start looking at pictures. I mean, what I found is that I realized I think there were 5 focal lengths which I always shot at, and even if I was shooting with a zoom, I'd always shoot at 20, 24, 35, 50, 85, 135, or 200.
Right.
Like, oh, these guys at the camera companies are onto something, aren't they?
Yeah, they have got a bit of a racket going on.
They've got a racket going on. But there is obviously something in that, the way the human eye works. So I pack as light as I can now. But now, you need to take a drone.
Mm-hmm.
I take a flimsy underwater housing, which I often don't use. Actually, I took my underwater housing to Australia, thinking I'd do some stuff in the rivers there in the Northern Territory. And my guy was like, the Sav Lord, who's like one of the most famous guys up there. He was like, mate, like, it's full of crocs, mate. What are you thinking? I was like, you've done a bit of research. You didn't realise crocs in Australia. Who knew that? So you got to take all these different things. And now, of course, you need to take film stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which I know me and Greg have talked about. It's a whole nother bloody ball ache. I've got a lot of my clients now will want some filming stuff as well. So the drone is obviously great for that. But,
Mm-hmm.
with your stills, you need a gimbal, you need a different tripod head. I've got one of these little Osmo Pockets, which is basically a really good lazy man's gimbal. And, if it's playing on the digital on the screen, I mean, most people wouldn't know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to think about that. And then, you're trying to switch, you're trying to shoot stills, and then you think, shit, I've got to shoot some video, but the gimbal's not set up. And, so, I mean, it's a whole... I try and simplify stuff as much as possible now.
That was one of my reasons for doing another camera swap. When I moved over because I'm using the Leica SL2s, you literally, to shoot over to video, you just flick over on the menu system and you're good to go.
Right. Yeah.
It's stabilized. I don't really bother with a gimbal because nothing I'm shooting really requires it. And then it's all handheld still, but because it's all in-body stabilized, I'm enjoying myself.
Exactly.
So I don't need to drag that
Greg,
much extra kit.
No, and it is all about that, because you don't actually need this. Just because you got loads of kit, it doesn't mean you're going to get great pictures.
Yep.
In a way, it's more cumbersome having more kit, because you're always trying to think about it.
Have you got any?
Be on the creative process, I think.
Have you got any little bits of kit that have kind of made your life like super? I'm going to show you what I've got here for the viewers at home. I've got a travel puck by a company called Skyroam, and it is a USB-C charged personal. I'm not endorsed, but it's a personal 4G hotspot, which has got pay-as-you-go data on it. So I can pull up 4G internet if it's available, but normally 3G, anywhere in the world for a flat fee. So I don't have to worry about crazy data costs when I'm traveling abroad.
Yeah, I've come across. I've met a lot of guides actually have those. A lot of foreign guides, obviously, do guides around different countries. That is a very good one. I mean, my number one tip for travel for anyone who's traveling abroad as a photographer, it's the most banal thing, but I didn't. My old assistant showed me it. It's the most stupid thing ever. But it's a multi-plug, 2 multi-plugs.
Yeah,
I mean, it's probably the most obvious thing in the world, but you only need one adapter, and you've got 7 charging sockets. It's brilliant.
Yeah, you clearly haven't watched my my travel kit bag videos on YouTube, have you, Tom? I could have seen that.
I'm saving that for when I'm feeling down.
YouTube.com/Greg Fennell.
Yeah, exactly. What else? God, I mean, not much else really. I just try and keep it as simple as possible. But when I'm traveling, so I mean, when I'm checking in, I mean, this is another thing that photographers have, is trying to check in with 36 kilograms of hand luggage, which we all have, which is absolute ball ache. You can't buy extra hand luggage on most jobs. So with that, I mean, what I tend to do, if it's a difficult airline, if it's a difficult airline, you have a little observation of what's going on at the other check-in desks, and you try and make an assessment of who looks nice.
Yeah.
then you go for that person. The other technique on that is you look for, if you're in that bit on the rope where there's lots of desks open, you haven't got a choice where you go. You look for the person that's the other customer who's having a massive argument with the person behind the desk, and then you go up and you're just the nicest person in the world.
Charm personified, yeah.
Obviously. But
see, for me, so one of the ways I deal with it is I when I'm traveling have a Peak Design 65 as my camera bag, and it looks just like a completely regular backpack. And because I'm a big guy, even though it's a big bag, it looks small on my back. So then what I do is I whip it off and I throw it around like it weighs nothing.
And
then I put it in the measuring thing, and I'm like, good, yeah, it fits. And then I pull it out, chuck it on my back.
No, I know that.
And people go,
it's fine. It's just nothing in here. It's like,
yeah. The trouble is though, I did do it once when I had a particularly like heavy load on it, and I threw it on my back, and then completely forgot about the weight, and it basically pulled me over to the left-hand side. I thought, oh, that actually looked pretty obvious.
Luckily, I don't know about you guys. I've actually never got on a flight without. I've always managed to get on a flight, even.
I've never had to check. I've never had to check my cameras, and for me, if I do ever have someone who's super difficult, I go, I'm not trying to be an arse, but can I have your name? And then I'll open up the camera of the bag, and I'll just be like, this is about 30 grand's worth of kit, and you're forcing me to check it. Just so you know, I know your name. I know that you're forcing me to check it. And then most people go, oh, I can't be bothered with this. Take it on.
What are you going to do? You're going to go back to the airport, find out where they live, and like go around and like.
Well, I don't know. I don't know quite what. I don't know quite
what people for that.
I do. But I don't know quite what the idea behind it is. But most people just tend to kind of crap themselves when they realise that they could somehow be liable for it. So they most of the time they just go, yeah, there you go. Fine.
Also, lithium batteries, they don't like them in the hold. So I just say this kit is riddled with lithium batteries. It needs to be in the cabin. But
that's where my Turkish airport gun story comes in. Because years and years ago, do you remember you guys have probably used them at some point, the Profoto Acute 600s? Remember them?
Yeah.
So when I was 23, 24, so it's like 10, 12 years ago, I had flown to Turkey for a shoot, and there was like super conflicting advice. Do you put the batteries in the hold? Do you put the batteries in your hand luggage? And they were pop-out square batteries that looked like ultra military-esque, like they were scary looking things. And I had them in my hand luggage, but not with anything else. So the woman at the desk pulled the battery out and was like, what's this? And
always going to have the paperwork, Tom.
Well, I know that now, obviously, but I pulled them out. I was super young, so we'll let this one go. But she pulled this battery out, and I didn't understand quite what she said because there was a serious language barrier. My Turkish was not good at the time, still not good now. And she kind of said, huh? What is this? And I kind of I mimed connecting it, and then just kind of went as in you put the battery in the flash, and then flashes happen. But what she heard was you connect the battery to the bomb and explosions happen. And I was like, oh. So she pushed the silent buzzer, and about 30 seconds later, I just heard like 10 heavy footsteps, and I turned around, and there were 5 guys with MP5 machine guns, and I was like, oh, this is terribly awkward. I'm so sorry. And then I get my phone out because it's like early days of like cellular technology. And I tried to connect to Google Translate or Babelfish at the time. And then she was like, what are you doing? Thinking I was trying to set something off with the phone. And I was like, yeah. So that was good.
You're taking a picture. Oh, you're up for a snap as well.
Well, do you know what's really funny is that afterwards I'd managed to kind of tell them what it was. And then they marched me down through the back of the airport down into where all the luggage was. They made me climb on everyone's baggage and find my bag. I then had to open it up, connect it all up, show them how it worked. And then on the way back up in the elevator, I'm with these guys with machine guns, and I was just like, this is funny, isn't it? Silence. They had no sense of humor about the whole thing at all. And
never joke about bombs in airports. That's definitely a travel takeaway.
Yeah, so yeah, if any of the listeners are tempted, I would not recommend it.
One thing I found, I travel with a jacket with incredibly deep pockets, deep enough, in fact, to carry a 7200. And I found that I've occasionally actually had to empty the heaviest lenses out of my bag and put them on the inside of this jacket. And you've lost 2 kilos with one lens, from your carry-on weight. The other thing is, if you actually connect up and have the cameras over your shoulder, that's deemed permissible. If you have 2 bodies with the biggest lenses you've got and you whack them on, then your bag will probably weigh about 8 kilograms less than it did.
Yeah, because they're then classified as personal items, aren't they?
Exactly.
They don't matter.
There's lots of ways, but the main thing is really charm. And
charm gets you everywhere.
Charm gets you everywhere.
One thing about Mr. Parker, he's very good at talking his way into places and out of things.
I'm going to put my way out of this thing.
Well, before you go, the last couple of very quick fire questions we have. So we always like to ask our guests 2 further questions. So one is your favorite current photo book, just in case it's one that we don't have and something that we might be interested in getting.
Favorite current photo book?
Well, I mean, it could be the photo book you've always loved. I mean,
okay.
Don't know how fickle you are.
I'm quite cynical. I mean, my favorite current photo book, and actually I've kind of come full circle, because this is actually one of the first photo books I ever bought. And
it's not a how-to, is it?
It's what? Sorry?
It's not a how-to.
Yeah, that's it. No, yes, A to Z. No, it's. I was looking at it yesterday. It's Workers by Sebastião Salgado, and it's really it is the book that got me into photography, like properly. I think, and I think it's
the one with the miners. Is that the miners?
Yeah. I mean, with the Brazilian miners. Yeah, I mean, he spent. I think he spent eight years doing it, and I just the scale of his projects are just absolutely inspiring and insane. He'll travel all around the world to 20 different countries, 30 different countries over a 10-year period to do a book. Much like his Genesis book. But I think the thing that he does incredibly, he just makes everything. He combines art photography with a story. Better than anyone else. He makes anything look beautiful. And there's not, he doesn't photograph in that book. He's not trying to put across poverty or anything like this. Everybody looks fantastic in it, even if they're, in their own kind of way. And his composition's the best. His subject matters just, subject matters. It's nothing, Workers, but he just makes everything just look great, and it's classical. It's everything I like in a photo. And I could look at that book for days on end. I never ever get bored. And he's just inspiring. I think important part of a photo book, you want to feel inspired after it as well. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have it. I bought so many photo books, and I look at them twice.
Yeah,
that's it. And they're on my shelf, and that's it. And that might be something else to do with life, but that book I just keep on going back to whenever I'm in need of inspiration.
Fantastic. And the final question then is about your desert island camera. If you had to have one for the rest of your life, what would it be? One that brings you joy?
Okay, sorry. I thought the question was, which camera would I save from a fire? It's a different question.
Well, I mean, I could arrange for that if you want.
Well, which camera would you
where you live?
Yeah. Which camera would...
It's number 4 Northway Road.
Which camera would you save from a fire and then go to a desert island with?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult question, this. I thought that I should, come up with some, answer, like the first brownie my grandfather gave me, or that has.
It's going to be your phone, isn't it? That's what you're going to answer.
Yeah.
The best camera is the one you've got with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other answer. But I was actually thinking, was the one I'd say from a fire would be the D100, which I've still got at home, simply from a purely nostalgic perspective, because that is the camera that started the journey. Really, that is the thing that started the last 15, 20 years of my life off. And if I hadn't have been I hadn't made that leap, and my parents hadn't, lent me the money, I probably wouldn't have. I probably might be doing something completely different. And I think for me, because I came to photography quite late, I think starting very early on in digital, I think that was a good thing, because I didn't come from a massive, I shot film, but I didn't come from a massive professional background of shooting film. So there was kind of no jump for me to make. So I'd probably save that little guy. Still takes good pictures, I hear.
2-megapixel photos.
And obviously, it's, for the right prices, available on the free market.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tom. I really think there are some interesting little nuggets for our listeners. It's great to get your wisdom.
Lack of, yeah. But thank you very much.
Lack of. Well, thank you very much, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, that was fun.
Well, thanks so much for tuning in this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you'd like to know more about today's guest and read the show notes, head along to www.exposenegative.com. And you can find us on Instagram at exnegative. See you next week.